Hello and welcome. Here we will see what is parameter binding, how we can bind from URI and from body. Also we will see about the attribute from URI, from body, how we can load arrays and lists from URI and from the body, also how to do the request form data, URL encoded and XML. And finally, we will see how to use type converters and model binders. Like I did in the previous video, I will leave a link in the description for you to download the source code of the project, not the project, the source code. And the important files here again are the global ASACs, the my configuration under the configuration folder, and on the controller folder, the parameter binding controller, where I have everything with comments and regions for you to try on these examples, okay? Also, I'm using a specific port on the examples. If you want to change that, you go here to the properties of the project, and in the tab web you can set your port here, okay? To make the requests to our web API, I'm using Postman. You can download this. This is a free app, okay? The first topic is what is parameter binding, and it is how web API loads received data, and it can load one or more parameters of different types, complex and primitive types, and it binds from URI and request body. Also, it expects data format like query strings for URI and attribute routing, for request body URL encoded, JSON, XML, and other types, okay? An example of query string will be something like this. You put a question mark and then you insert the properties. The attribute routing will be a route like this with placeholders, and you insert the values in the real address like this. URL encoded is like a query string, but it goes in the body, okay? JSON is this format, and XML will be something like this. Now let's take a look on binding defaults on Web API for HTTP methods. The first one, get, doesn't have a body, so it must get the primitive types and the complex types from the URI. But for post, it has a body, so primitive types came from URI and complex types came from request body. This is by default, and we can change this, okay? Put and patch is exactly the same thing as post, and delete is the same thing as get. Let's see some examples of how you can bind via URI. All the examples are in parameter binding controller. It has the route prefix of API/Mortal Kombat, and the first example is with a query string. It is an action method called character A, receives an integer that is the ID. It has the route A/character, and it is a HTTP GET. Our request will be get API/Mortal Kombat/A/character ID equals to a number that we want. In this example is the number 1. The next example is the same thing with multiple parameters. Our action method receives two parameters. The first is the integer ID, the second is the string name. Okay, and our query string will be ID equals to 1 and name equals to ABC. Also, you can switch the parameters. Name comes first and ID last, okay? Let's take a look at example C. Is the same thing, but is a HTTP post. Our action method is the same thing. What changed here is just the attribute HTTP post, and our request will be a post, and the URI is the same as the previous example. Remember, post gets primitive types from URI. Okay, we are doing things with query strings, but also we can do it with attribute routing. In this example, this action method accepts a get and a post, and it has a route D character, placeholder for the ID, and placeholder for the name. So our request will be the same thing as the previous examples, but instead of using a query string, we use the attribute routing path. Okay, and attention, in this case we are using a get and this a post, and this is not like query string. We cannot switch the parameters, okay, because we have this static path ID name. Now let's see how you can bind via body. And we have a complex type, that is the character. It has an integer, that is the ID, a string, that is the name, and our action method will receive the character C, okay, the complex type. So our request will be the URI that we have, the route prefix plus the route we have here, and in the request body we say that we are sending a JSON, application JSON, and we insert here the JSON, okay, ID 1 name ABC. And this example is a known object. The next example is an unknown object. Why? Because we have a dynamic. Is exactly the same thing as the previous one. We can send a JSON, but in this case we set the properties as we want. Okay, I have here a ID, a name, and a XPTO. Okay, you can access the properties like this: c.name and c.id and so forth. The next example is with mixing parameters with query string plus JSON. We have here a integer, a primitive type, and a complex type, that is our character. So our request will be something like this. We have the URI question mark, we set the age equals to 123, and we have here in the body raw JSON application JSON, and we insert here our JSON ID 1 name ABC. As you can see, the primitive type age goes in the URI and the complex type goes in the request body. Also, we can do this with attribute routing. Is exactly the same thing, but we have a attribute routing. Like we have a placeholder for the age and the complex type goes in the request body. The example F3 is the same thing, but in this case, instead of using a character, we are using a dynamic. So the request will be exactly the same thing. What change is the JSON in the request body. It can be whatever we want. The next example is the same thing, the dynamic with attribute routing. Okay, so these are the things that we can do with this. Next, let's see FromUri attribute, and it is used to force the web API to get parameters from URI. And in our first example we have HTTP post, and we will force to get a complex type from query string. We just use this FromUri attribute before character C, and our request will be a post, a normal post with a query string question mark ID equals 1 and name equals ABC. The next example is trying to do the same thing with dynamic, but in this case we cannot do that because it doesn't have properties. The dynamic object doesn't have properties, and Web API doesn't know what is the ID and what is the name. It will behave like a primitive type. If you try something like question mark C equals to 3, 4, it will work. The next example, G3, is the same thing but with attribute routing. We say that we get from the URI this character, and we have our attribute routing like this: ID, placeholder for the ID of the character, and a placeholder for the name of the character. Okay, the Web API knows that the ID refers to the ID of the character and the name is for the name of the character. Okay, you can also say c.id and c.name. and our request will be like a simple request with attribute routing. We have a post and a character /1 for the ID and /abc for the name. The next example is with dynamic, and again Web API doesn't know what to do because dynamic have no properties, okay? The example G5 from URI with multiple parameters and attribute routing. So in this case we have this example with attribute routing and multiple parameters with from URI attribute. What will happen is, because we are just specifying one ID and one name, it will think that the value will go for the two parameters. So C1 will have an ID of 123 and C2 will have an ID of 123. C1 will have the name of ABC and C2 will have the name of ABC. Okay, you can change these with c1.id, c1.name and c2.id, c2.name. So in this case it will know that the 1 is for C1, 2 is for C2, and ABC is for the name of C1, def is for the name of C2. And we have the same behavior if we use query string instead of attribute routing. Okay, so we can say ID equals 1 and name equals ABC. If we just say that, the 1 will go on both variables and ABC will go on both variables. Okay, also you can say c1.id equals 1 and c1.name equals ABC and c2.id equals 2 and c2.name equals def. Now let's see FromBody attribute. This is the same thing as from URI, but in this case we are getting the parameters from the request body. And the first example is this. We say FromBody int because an integer is a primitive type and by default HTTP post will get it from the URI. Here we are forcing it to get the value from the request body. If we try to use the attribute in 2 parameters or more, it will give us an error, okay? It is not allowed to do this kind of thing, and it will complain, can't bind multiple parameters C and D to the request content. I think this is related to buffers or something like that. I didn't read about this topic, but I think this is about buffers and they don't allow us to do this because of that problem. In the example H3 we get a raw JSON from the body, okay? This is actually a escape string like this one, and because of that, because it's a string, it's not a JSON, we have to call this library JSON-converter deserialize object of type character, and we pass the string s, and then we can use it as a character object. Also, the request is a little confusing because we are sending JSON in a JSON request, but it is actually a string, a escaped string, okay? Now let's see how to get arrays and lists from URI. The first example is just this, from URI integer array IDS, okay? And our request will be like this. We make a get and we have a query string where we say IDS equals 1 and IDS equals 5 and so forth. For lists we do exactly the same thing, but the difference is just this: the parameter is a list instead of an array. If we try to do the same thing but with a character array, like, and remember that in example G7 from URI multiple parameters, we add something like c1.id equals 1 and c1.name equals abc and so forth. In this case this will not work. The web API doesn't know how to handle these kind of things in this situation, okay? Now let's see the same thing but from the body. And the first example, arrays and lists from body, we have from body, list of character, C, and our request will be something like this. We have an array of JSON. And remember that post will get by default complex types from body, so we don't need from body attribute. Okay, the next example we will try to get a list of characters, and to do that we have a raw JSON application and we pass an array of array. Okay, and inside of the second array we have JSON objects for character. Now let's see how to handle and make form data requests. The first example, K1, we provide this request form data with the key name and the value ABC. To get the value ABC, we call http context.current.request.form and we provide the key name. The next example, we have two properties, name and ID, and we do exactly the same thing, but we have two, so we do for each key in the form keys and we access each value of these properties. Okay, you can also do a request like this. Instead of form data we choose raw text and we provide this text is like a query string. ID equals 123 and name equals Kanu. Let's see how to handle and make URL encoded requests. To handle we do the same way as form data, and to make the request we choose xwww form URL encoded. We provide the keys, we provide the values, or we can do in the same way as form data, we choose raw text and we provide values as a query string. Also you can receive a parameter HTTP request message and you can get values from here with await, request, content, read as form data async. And also you have to assign async to your action method and it will return a task for string. Now let's see how to make the same thing with XML. So this is the old way. We make the request like this. We choose raw XML application XML. We provide the XML here, and to handle it we have to receive a HTTP request message. The request, we create a XML document and then we load the XML document with request.content.read as stream async dot result. This is a stream, okay, and after that we have a XML string that we get from document element dot outer XML. We create a serializer for character and we create a text reader that has the XML string. With this we can call the serializer, deserialize, and we pass the reader with our XML string. So in this way we get our character. I said this is the old way because Web API allow us to do this in a simple way. We have to activate XML serialization, and to do that we on the global asax.cs we have to call this global configuration.formatters.xml formatter, and then we call xml.use XML serializer equals true. So with this we activate XML serialization. Now we can create the same request, raw XML application XML, we provide the XML and we just have to say in our action method that we receive a character C, and Web API knows how to convert it into a character. It is possible also to send arrays and lists, and to do that we do the same request, is a raw XML application XML, we provide the XML, but in this way we have a trick. Because it is a list or a array, we have to say array of character. For example, if we have a class of type person, it will be array of person, okay? Now let's see what is type converters and how to use these. Imagine that we want to treat a complex type like a primitive type. We want to get it from the URI, okay? So imagine this example. We have a character v2c and we will get it from the URI like a query string. C equals 123 underscore ABC. Okay, so to do that, we go to our class and we create first a method that knows how to convert from string to a character v2. Then we have to create another class that is called character v2 converter, and it extends type converter. Then we have to override the method canConvert like this, and after that we have to override the method convert from. We have a value like this. If the value is a string, we pass that string to our try parse of character v2, the method that knows how to convert a string into a character v2. Okay, and with this, finally, we add a attribute to our class character v2 with this value type converter type of character v2 converter, just this. And then we can use it as a primitive type. We just have to call with the query string c equals 123 underscore abc, and Web API knows how to convert this string into a character v2. This is valid to attribute routing, okay? You can use it on attribute routing. Now let's see what is ModelBinder and how to use it. It is the same thing as type converter, but is more dynamic. It allows us to apply at parameter level. Let's see an example, 123 underscore ABC. In this case, we are saying that Web API must apply a ModelBinder that we configured. Okay, if we don't use this attribute, it will not use the ModelBinder that we configured. Okay, so we can choose if we use or not. Also, it allows us to access HTTP requests, action description, and raw values from the route. Let's see how it works. The first thing that we need to do is create a method that knows how to convert a string into our class. Okay, and then we have to create another class character v3 ModelBinder that implements iModelBinder, and this, take attention here because there are two model binding. Okay, the right one is system.web.http.modelBinding. Okay, this is the right one. The system.web.modelBinding is for ASP.NET web forms. Okay, it's old, it's not for us. Now let's implement the bind model. So we must implement this method that receives a HTTP action context and a model binding context, and this is the implementation. This is some validations to ensure that everything is okay, and after that we pass the string value into our try parse, the method that knows how to convert the string into a character v3. Okay, and then we pass the character v3 into binding context.model. Is just this. After that we have to add the attribute to our parameter. In this case we say ModelBinder type of character v3a ModelBinder. So we are saying this type as this ModelBinder. Okay, we have a second option where we just say ModelBinder. To use this we must configure it, and we go to my configuration on register, and we say provider is equals to new simple ModelBinder provider, and we provide the type of character v3. We are saying that the character v3 has a ModelBinder called character v3 ModelBinder. Then we go to config.services.insert. For ModelBinder provider, we give this new provider. We have a third way to use the ModelBinder, and in this way we don't need to assign any attribute to our parameter. Okay, to do that we must assign an attribute to our class character v3, where we say ModelBinder type of character v3 ModelBinder. So this type as this ModelBinder is just that. Also, you can choose what type of ModelBinder you will use for this type at parameter level. Okay, in this case we are giving another ModelBinder that is called character v3 C. Okay, this is B and this is C. Okay, this is the end, and as always, thank you for watching.